I stumbled upon a group on Roblox recently that took me down a pretty dark rabbit hole. It was an attempt at replicating the Nazi aesthetic on the platform. At least, that's what it looks like at first glance. However, it was actually much more disturbing than that. A cult leader using his position of power to exploit his very young following. Brandon was an avid player on the Roblox platform. In 2017, he became fascinated with the sandbox element the gaming platform had provided. But what stuck out to him even more was the social aspect. He had quickly begun to form his own community inside an already established corner of the Roblox platform. It's known as the SCP community. SCP stands for Secure, Contain, and Protect. It's a pretty well-known collaborative fictional project which tells the story of a containment facility which holds many different paranormal and supernatural beings. Fans of this community would take the project into Roblox, replicating the facilities and the SCPs, as they're called, on the platform, giving a whole new meaning to a collaborative fictional project. Brandon would join this community under the username AlbertHellerium, hoping to establish himself as a figurehead within the project, and he would get to work pretty quickly. AlbertHellerium's SCP group was nothing to really boast about. It had poor development, a low member count, and nothing of value to add to the community. But there was something Albert had created inside of this group that would become the first puzzle piece to this story. It was called the Hellerian Dynasty. This was essentially like a family on Roblox. Users who were invited to join the dynasty were required to change their Roblox usernames to include the Hellerian surname. They were then placed on a family tree, most members becoming sons or daughters of AlbertHellerium himself. This could have been some strange case of role-playing on the platform, or maybe it was the beginning of a twisted fantasy. Albert's SCP group was not doing too bad at this point. He had reached up to 2,000 members and had some decent activity in his Discord server. But not long after AlbertHellerium joined the SCP community, he would find himself in some controversy. A user by the name of Korakat posted a message to a public Discord server, outlining a discovery they had made regarding AlbertHellerium. It's a pretty long message, and I'm going to warn you now, it's pretty disturbing. AlbertHellerium is an approximately 20-year-old male offender living in Arkansas. He was charged 4 years ago for possessing a very underage person. Quick side note, I was able to sneak into Albert's close circle to investigate the validity of these claims, and I'll get into it later in the video, but I just want to add that here. Anyways, I'm sure he would love to have you believe this is a lie, as I would have loved to believe before I started contact with him. Since then, he has sent and received pictures to people he knew were not of legal age. Aside from the pictures, he also engages in revolting acts such as pole dancing with said not legal people on Roblox. There is much more to this statement, but for the sake of not getting this video taken down, I'm not going to say the rest. AlbertHellerium would of course deny these accusations, making an announcement to the community stating, "This is an attempt to slur and make someone look bad because they didn't get their way." Korakat, the person who posted the original accusation against Albert, started a personal investigation because someone close to her was getting hit on by Albert, her sister, who went by the name Yuki. Albert would threaten to ban Yuki if she didn't accept his sexual advances. And yes, Yuki was a minor at this time. After Korakat had found out about this, that her sister was being potentially exploited, she began her own investigation. She would join Albert's SCP Discord, and after flirting with him for just a day, she was immediately given a pretty high rank within the group. Korakat would then use her position inside of Albert's circle to grab any personal details she could, including his age, which she states is at the minimum 20 years old. Korakat also states that she received messages from Albert that made her feel, quote, disgusted to a point that made her cease her investigation and leave the community entirely. But there was still much more to be uncovered, stuff that was undoubtedly even more disturbing. There are 6 documents at least that I could find, that provide the majority of the insight into the story. That's 118 pages of weird and arguably illegal stuff that this guy did, documented by community members that had the misfortune of interacting with him. One of these documents, written by members of the SCP community, detailed the interactions between Albert and his group. This included sexual, racist, and sexist jokes, but much more alarmingly, he was having parties in-game, teleporting players to a secluded area on the map, where he could have these parties away from the public's view. It's a pretty similar layout to what you would see in a condo game. If you don't know what a condo game is, it's pretty much just a sex game on Roblox. I'm not really going to go into detail about these games. I recommend just watching a few YouTube videos on those. They're kind of interesting. Anyways, Cora Cat wasn't the only unfortunate person to find themselves surrounded by this disturbing community. Another user who went by the name Katinas had her own story to tell, one that would strangely foreshadow Albert's future endeavors.
Yeah, but I was thinking at the time. So I used to be really obsessed with SCP stuff for some reason. And I was at Group Recruiting Plaza. I was trying to find like SCP groups. And I saw Albert's group. And I joined and stuff. Everything was normal. But then once I got into the Discord server, like, I joined their VCs and they'd say like really suggestive stuff and they'd be like really weird to me and stuff. And Albert and all his little minions would say that he's like 14, so it's fine for him to joke about that kind of stuff. Like, he'd just say really sexual things and it made me really uncomfortable. But I was like, okay, whatever, because he's like 14. It's not an old man, but it actually is. And so I called his group a cult one time in the Discord, and he got so mad at me, like, over a joke. Like, I don't understand why he got so mad, but he was, like, attacking me in DMs and stuff, and he even said, like, something along the lines of, oh, you're a big girl now, you're going to use caps and, like, punctuation. So that sounded, like, really weird. It made me uncomfortable, and I thought he was just some 14-year-old boy being stupid with nothing better to do. Little did I know he's a fucking 27-year-old man, 27-year-old man that was posing as a 14-year-old. One time even, like, they just, like, teleport me, if that's the word, to him and his, like, other group thing, not the SCP thing, and they try to, like gangbang me in Roblox.
AlbertHellerium's SCP group was pretty gross, to say the least, and the entire community had rallied around this sentiment. And as such, Albert was forced to pack his bags and leave the genre, pitching his tent within a new community, one that closely aligned with his values. AlbertHellerium's new project on the platform was far from an improvement. In fact, it was a fictional nation under the name Hellerian Regime. The uniforms and other respective development assets were very much inspired, if not directly copied, from Nazi Germany. He had his own SS Guard divisions and, coincidentally, a mirror of the Hitler Youth program. It was undoubtedly an attempt at recreating the Nazi regime on the platform. Whether he wanted to hide behind the curtain of a fictional nation or not, the truth is very clear.
These ranks have no significance, right?
Yeah, they do.
Oh, my bad.
They do. They're Nazi party ranks, okay?
His values clearly align with this idea as well. Countless statements from himself, degrading Jewish people, and praising Hitler himself. This is objectively a bad environment to foster on a platform that is majority children, but this didn't deter AlbertHellerium. He wanted to take things even further. When I reached out and spoke to the alleged victims in this tragic story, the way they would describe the environment in this Hellerium community was cult-like, but I'll get into it and break down the victim interviews later in the video. A cult is defined as a misplaced or excessive admiration for a particular person or thing. This Roblox group was almost exactly that. In fact, he had already laid out the foundation for this cult in his Hellerium dynasty, which I had mentioned earlier. AlbertHellerium was placed at the top of this family tree, directly followed by his princess, and then his sons. Below his direct family were his supreme command and military generals. These ranks and positions within the group were the end goal for most players who found themselves joining the Hellerian regime. Higher ranks gave players flashy gear and a sense of status within the community, but they would have to appease the man at the top, AlbertHellerium, if they wanted any chance at ranking up. Those who were inside the dynasty, even those at the very bottom, were afraid of leaving. They would be seen as a traitor and effectively cut off from the entire community. Most of these people had little to no social life outside of Roblox, so this was a pretty big deal to them. But this wasn't the only chain holding members to Hellerium. Albert himself would build relationships, some becoming sexual, with his close circle, effectively keeping dynasty members loyal to Albert and his regime. Albert's Hellerian regime was positioned within a corner of Roblox known as the World War II genre. It's essentially a collective of player-made nations role-playing and battling each other on the platform, using aesthetics from the 1939 to 45 period. Of course, it's important to note player-made factions that aim to replicate Nazi Germany on the platform are strictly prohibited, in accordance with Roblox's terms of service. This would be the first red flag for people when they first encounter the Hellerian regime. The second red flag would, of course, be the stories from within. The Hellerian regime would be active for at least a year or two, if I'm not mistaken, before something would finally happen. Leaders from inside the Roblox World War II community would take notice to the out-of-touch things Albert would say, but more alarmingly, the things he did in the SCP community. This would ignite an investigation. One of the leaders of this investigation was a user named Alexander, who led a fictional nation of his own inside the community. Alec delved into a pretty deep investigation, gathering evidence and interviewing alleged victims. In fact, he was the one who interviewed Katinas, who I mentioned earlier. He would post these interviews and the evidence onto his YouTube page, where the entire community would be able to view his findings. On one of these videos, he had confronted Albert directly with the evidence that was collected. Allegedly, Albert had sent someone who was not of legal age a sexual picture, to which Albert responded by saying it wasn't his image and he had gotten it off of Google. Even if the image in question wasn't of himself, he just admitted to sending a sexual image to someone who was underage. This, of course, would spark outrage in the Roblox World War II community. People demanded he leave, even people from within the Hellerian dynasty, and sooner than later, what quickly became known as the Hellerian Civil War was now underway. Another video on Alexander's page, this time titled The Hellerian Civil War, documented these next few set of events. The video states that Albert had ruled over Hellerium with an iron fist, and he was forming a cult fueled by grooming and manipulation of people who are loyal to him. The rest of the video showcases the chaos from within the Hellerian regime. Players raiding Albert's games and chanting, "Death to the Peds." Of course, Albert couldn't do much to prevent his Roblox empire from collapsing. It was inevitable. His dark and twisted actions are what led up to this, and surely this would mean he would leave the platform and disappear off the internet. But no, he wasn't done yet. AlbertHellerium, believe it or not, had only just begun his journey on the Roblox platform. His actions were only going to get worse from here. He would move on to do a Star Wars-themed game, where instead of focusing on development and creating an enjoyable atmosphere, he was talking to minors and sharing explicit content with them, which is a shock to absolutely no one who knew him up to this point. His Star Wars project would soon grind to a halt, as he would lose passion for the community. But following a reoccurring pattern with Albert, he drifted from one community to another, searching for a haven to anchor his depravity, leading him to develop a Roman-themed faction. It's worth asking, why was he so persistent? What drove him to continue this sick spree on Roblox, of all places? Albert, or Brandon as he's known in real life, doesn't exactly live the best of lives. Brandon is roughly 23 to 27 years old, somewhere in that range. He's been kicked out of multiple residences, fired from many jobs, and spends most of his free time on Roblox. It's his virtual paradise, a place away from his dark and sad life. You just gotta feel bad for the guy. It seems like the world is working against him, and he's just playing Roblox to get away from it all. And I wish that was true, but it isn't. Most, if not all, of his misfortunes are his own fault. Brandon lived with his brother for an extended period of time. This was during the period in which he ran the Hellerian dynasty. But this wouldn't last very long, all because of one stupid mistake Brandon had made. You see, Brandon was unemployed for the most part, Or sometimes he was bouncing between jobs before getting fired or quitting. The majority of his income came from Roblox, but not in the way you would think. He would consistently beg for money from his group members. And begging, by the way, is an understatement. So many messages about money in his Discord server. It's honestly impressive. He wasn't just begging his soldiers for money, but he was also begging his dynasty. Never before seen conversations with his dynasty members would reveal another dark twist. He would ask them for money, and when they couldn't dish anything out for him, he would threaten to harm himself. Keep in mind, the majority of his dynasty members are minors. But this was his lifeline, Roblox.
This close to the edge. Jumping from this car. That was close. Should do it, probably.
His begging would also turn out to be a negative rather than a positive for him. His Discord bio boasted his full name and PayPal email, hoping to encourage people to send money to him. But this wasn't the case. His name was instead used to find his social medias, and in turn, his sister-in-law's Facebook page. She was informed about Albert's actions online, and she was understandably disgusted. Brandon was kicked out of his brother's home. Whether or not this was the ethical thing to do, I'll leave that up to you. He was miserable at this point, if it wasn't already obvious. How could he possibly get his life back together? There was only one correct answer to this: Roblox. But to be more specific, he wanted to reopen the Hellerium regime, so he could be in control once again. Now, when it comes to investigating stuff like this, I'm usually gathering media and witness accounts to build a story. But now I'm presented with a unique opportunity to get a first-hand glimpse into this community. My original plan was to join the Hellerium regime and try to find my way into Albert's Hellerium dynasty, but it wasn't going to be easy, and unfortunately for me, might not be possible. It was pretty easy, however, to join the regime. I clicked on the Discord attached to the Roblox group and followed the instructions to get enlisted. And according to an announcement Albert himself made, the group was in a state of development and hasn't officially launched. So I'm here pretty early, and hopefully this would help gain some trust with Albert himself. They were hosting some events this week and I was able to attend. This included what is known as a dynasty gathering, where members of the Hellerium dynasty gathered to discuss group-related affairs. However, Albert himself wasn't able to attend. He had lost his computer and had no way to access Roblox for now. But that wasn't his fault. It was the fault of his community members, who failed to gather enough money for him to buy a replacement, including his 14 Patreon members, who were only able to gather $26 for their emperor. Regardless, Albert was able to use his phone to join the Discord call, where he would say something pretty interesting.
I'm just scared of the background checks. I don't know what they're gonna find. I don't know how the background checks work out, okay? Nah, like,
You're a minor.
I'm gonna give them my new Gmail. I don't want to give them my old one.
Or a minor.
I want you to hold on to what he just said there. We're going to need it later. Eventually, Albert was able to gather some money on his own to buy a new laptop, and he was able to attend some events. His first rally back was an army-wide inspection, and I knew I couldn't miss this. I had to try and appease Albert in an attempt to climb up the ranks. Unfortunately for me, however, my plan was foiled. The first words that were exchanged between me and Albert were far from productive. He immediately called me an alt, which is short for alternate account. He had somehow knew I wasn't who I was pretending to be. Maybe it was the poorly designed avatar, or maybe it was just suspicious of someone random to be attending these events. Admittedly, I lost hope at this point. I didn't think it was possible to rank up from here, but that's when something strange happened. And by the way, I swear I'm not making this up. This just randomly happened. I was invited by a general to become an officer. All I had to do was state my past experience and say an oath. I completely made up my past experience, by just random names, and said the oath with my made-up name. And now I was an officer in Albert's Hellerium regime, and I was one step closer to where I want to be. This is also when I noticed something in chat. One of Albert's Supreme Command had publicly banned someone from the Discord. I knew I had to find out why. Maybe he had some useful information, so I DM'd him, and even though he was understandably skeptical at first, he agreed to do an interview. And this is how I unraveled a truly disgusting story. He was banned from the Hellerian regime after calling Albert a predator publicly. He was a follower of Albert for a few years now, and was already disgruntled with Albert's shenanigans.
Basically, let me tell you a bit of a backstory. I joined Hellerium around when I was 12 years old, I'm gonna be honest, around 2020. And eventually, Albert didn't like me from the start. Me and him became closer eventually, and he shut his group down and moved to Star Wars, or at least tried doing a Star Wars genre, which utterly failed, and all of his downfall started because when he did his Star Wars group, at least 5 different victims came with DMs proving of him ERPing with minors and him minors and him pictures to minor. In general, there's still a lot of people in Hilaria that Albert said that are minors too. I know one of my friends is one of those people, which I talk a lot to, and I see a lot of Albert texting that person pictures and wanting to fuck and shit like that, and inappropriate jokes he did with me too. And or him having people in like high positions, like the princess consort already has sent him pictures, and that is a male too, and I saw those pictures and it's disgusting.
A very important piece of information was revealed to me during this interview. Although not very surprising, Albert was exchanging nudes and having East the minor at this very moment, and the victim was willing to be interviewed. I'm going to call him David for now, of course to protect the identity of the victim. David and Albert were exchanging sexually charged DMs, while Albert was aware that the victim was a minor. In fact, Albert has no way of denying this. He himself confirmed that the victim was a minor, and coincidentally, I caught it on recording.
I'm just scared of the background checks. I don't know what they're gonna find. I don't know how the background checks work out, okay? Nah, like,
You're a minor.
I'm gonna give them my new Gmail. I don't want to give them my old one.
Or a minor.
So, I joined Hilaria when it was about, like, late 2023, around, like, November. I initially joined it when it was a Roman group instead of, like, the 1960s and 1950s. But Albert started DMing me. He was like, where are you from? Like, are you a spy? Like, did someone send you here? And he started questioning me and stuff. And it just slowly, like, took off from there. Like, he started asking me, oh, are you a femboy? Because he noticed my Roblox avatar. And then he started, like, getting sexual and asking sexual questions. And saying, oh my gosh, you're gonna become the next empress. And I was like, what does that mean? And he kept on, like, saying that there were a bunch of, like, stuff tied to it that involved, like, sex and, like, sending images, and I wasn't really into that. But it came to my attention that, like, you couldn't really rise to ranks if you weren't, like, a femboy, if you weren't, like, a sex slave. I thought that was really weird.
Before I concluded my investigation, and would subsequently publish this video, I wanted to try something. I wanted to speak with Albert. I would have to be very careful. I didn't want to blow my cover, as I had some future plans I didn't want to ruin. So I got a friend to help me out, and together we would join a voice chat with Albert. Of course, my friend would be doing all the talking.
Hi, Albie.
He was sitting there alone, potentially waiting on someone to join. He was skeptical of us at first, but after about 20 minutes of small talk, he was comfortable around us.
Dude, I was told to, like, stay away from this group and shit by other people.
Of course they were. Everybody knows me better than I know myself.
They were saying, well, it wasn't about you, it was more about the people in the group. Like, they're saying there's a bunch of femboys.
There's nothing wrong with gays or anything. Won't. This is an open community. We accept anyone. I don't really care what you are. I don't care what your sexuality is, it's your life. It's private. I don't give a fuck. Do what you want to do.
And I told my friend to ask some questions of interest. And the response we got was more straightforward than I would have ever expected.
You care about age, though?
And to an extent, yes.
This was absolutely a crazy statement to catch, and this was pretty much all we needed. We knew a direct confrontation would lead nowhere, as we would have either gotten banned or just muted instantly, but it was also to protect the final part of my plan. If you remember, I'm an officer in this Discord server, and I have permissions to ping at everybody. I want to use this power in his own server for good. Once this video comes out, I hope to put the link in his own Discord, at everyone in the server, and hopefully, I'll be able to save at least a few people from this potentially dangerous environment. extended victim interviews, 2 new interviews I didn't even include in the video, along with transcripts and detailed evidence are available on my Patreon completely for free. Just give me about a week after the upload of this video just to get everything up there. I'm going to warn you though, it's pretty disturbing stuff. Thank you guys so much for watching. This has been a crazy, crazy video. If you don't mind, hit that subscribe button.